No, I just kind of wanted to also just start by like just thanking you and like the whole team for just being so brilliant and actually offering the platform for a recent graduate. Well, it's been about 3 years, but yes, just giving us the platform and the venue and actually having a physical show to showcase the work and just giving us the opportunity to do this. So yes, massive thank you. Like just this is not enough, but yes, there it is. But yes, many mornings just calling Rhiannon in panic, like, oh, I've got this to do. Like, what do I do? I need someone to talk to, and she was always there. So massive thank you. Yes. But yes, let's make this half an hour go quick. But yeah, so I'm a ceramicist based in Cardiff. I graduated in 2018 from Cardiff Met and currently based in Fireworks. So I'm kind of going to go through my natural progression through ceramics since while doing my degree and since graduating and where the work is at the moment and where it's heading. So yeah. So from the beginning, I've been questioning how certain histories are recorded and the way they are archived and remembered through history. And there's some influences I've got here. I've got like this idea of like how work can be just captured with the essence. There's like some examples by Picasso and Susan Nemeth where the work is just simply captured with a few lines, and I like that idea. Just capturing the spirit of something by the simple shapes. So, and also I like the idea of affordances, which is a theory by Norman, which means how we perceive things and how they are made. So how do we interact with them? So a handle suggests how something is picked up, but also like playing against that. So playing against what we perceive or how things should be used and not used. There's two main strands of history which I find inspiration. And within those two strands in history of displaying ceramics in a domestic space prior to the 20th century, and that's porcelain rooms and palaces and stately homes, and the more familiar type of domestic space in which people encounter ceramics. This being the kitchen dresser, the mantelpiece, ornaments clustered on tables and shelves. This divide is mirrored in two types of sites where contemporary ceramics are curated: stately homes and palaces, and ordinary homes. Drawing attention to the palaces and stately homes as a site for the display of ceramics serves to remind us that historically there are instances where high status examples of such work, porcelain particularly, were exhibited in high domestic spaces, an environment also considered eminent, suitable for the display of painting and sculpture. Such places serve as a public function as well as containing more private domestic space. In the modern and postmodern periods, the home has been both an important and undervalued location for encountering art, particularly ceramics. Important because domestic space is a traditional site for encountering ceramics, and undervalued because of the understanding of the domestic space as a female sphere associated with the function, the financial value of objects, and the small scale of required to display ceramics in the home. So this is a saying from Moira Vicentelli from the Women's and Ceramics Gendered Vessels. Despite this association, artists working with clay have sought to return to their work to a domestic context or create an association with a type of location that through the modern period that has been constructed as the aesthetics of serious arts. So I'm interested in porcelain and its history. So some of my references are early Meissen bowls and set vases, but also the reference to the trade and the foundation of porcelain and that frantic quest to find how porcelain was made in China and brought back to Europe. So different artists have perceived these objects and have made work by themselves, and in response to that, in turn, others subsequently have done that as well. So we've got some displays at the Cardiff Museum and some responses from Edmund Duval to that display of 18th century ceramics. So first year of university, I was very much interested in that idea of beauty and how we look at function and beauty and how things are perceived. And this is kind of like a body of work which I came to the conclusion of my first year. So starting with the little teapot, the teacup on the left, and each cup being a slightly interpretation of the previous one and evolving towards something on the other side, which is slightly abstract, but still containing that essence, but it could be perceived in different ways. So some of them have holes on the bottom, some of them can be displayed upside down, and yeah, so those themes have just been developing ever since. Second year of university, I actually had the privilege of going to Korea. So it was an opportunity for me to immerse myself in the creative life of South Korea and questioning, comparing, and contrasting the ways of thinking and acting on cultural differences, similarities, and opportunities that these experiences provoke within my subject area, ceramics. So cultural perception, which leads into personal or individual groups' perception on how we view the world and how we perceive the world, and different cultures produce work with that perception differently to someone that just depending on where you're from, or just the fact that you're an individual, you perceive the world in different ways, and that's quite captivating to me. And that's also led for me to really dramatically produce the work I'm producing now. So actually you can just see a little reference to Ki Ho Kan, which there was an exhibition on him in Korea, which really was a Kickstarter for the work I'm producing now. So really working with the coil and how important that is to me. There's a sense of me being really immersed with the piece, spending time. It's slightly different to throwing, but at the same time I also do throwing, but it's a different way of like capturing the work. So mainly I do coil, but I also enjoy throwing. And this work was actually in response to Gordon Baldwin. So I was looking at the 60s and what it meant during that period where traditionally they were really much against what the vessel was or what it could be. So I was really connecting and exploring what that meant. And it was quite a good approach for me to be aware of what was happening at the time for me to move forward. So we kind of need to know what has happened for us to move on to the future, I guess. So I don't want it to be like a trodden narrative and just keep talk about the same things they were talking about. It's quite good to be reflecting and thinking now. I've moved from that, but it was during a period which I thought it was quite important to think about. But yeah, so not sure initially what to think about that particular piece. I just made like this massive moon jar and put it in the kiln, and it starts warping, and you're like, what do you do with this? But it kind of was the idea of like it becoming something. It's trying to go somewhere, and there's so much we can do for it to. And yeah, so I kind of like that idea of it potentially going somewhere or trying to become something, and yeah, so people are not too sure initially what to think about it, and I like this idea of the precarious nature of it and how uneasy people felt around it. Is it going to fall? We don't know. And these attempts of evoking of the somethingness other than what it is, a pot, this has led me to think about the exploration of where craft sits within the fine art spectrum. So it's a well-trodden narrative for those within the field of ceramics, but my work tries to fit this intervening space, a description coined by Jerome Wittenberg in her book, Craft in Transition. I've actually tried to look up this book, but I can't find it anywhere else now. It was in this library and now I can't find it, so, which is a shame. But the space, she talks about this intervening space as a space between function and non-function, tradition, breaking with tradition, craftsmanship-based art and idea-based art. I was constantly working on it's just seeing where the work fits, and I know people get very passionate about these ideas, and you're probably like barfing at the idea of me talking about it, but it was very good for me to be thinking about this while I was making the work and how I could develop it. So it was a body of work which got some more traditional shapes, and but then I was looking at flux, and that has the potential of becoming something. Is it clay? Is it glaze? So it's slowly becoming something. The warpage of the work, where is it going? Is it trying to become something? So these are very basic ideas, which, well, now I'm thinking they are very basic because I've slightly evolved from the work. But yeah, playing with that idea of like, how do we interact with objects? So having multiple handles, where do I begin? Do I touch it over here? But then again, some bits are melted, and then do I touch it? Do I not touch it? And then got like stacks of plates which are glued together, and then it's not a stack of plates anymore. It's becoming like, I don't know, is it a little sculpture? I don't know. Or is it just a stack of plates? I don't know. It's something. And I don't know if it's just always, it doesn't have a certain pinpoint description of what the work is. It's always questioning where it is and what it will be, and yeah. So here are some more elements of that body of work. This particular piece looks like a traditional teapot, tea set, but then again, some pieces come out. For example, that little jar comes out, but then the lid is stuck on. So it's a bit of a play on that idea of function and creating frustration and humor, and ponder questions where things fit and if it should fit, or where if it should fit some categories. I don't know. So just pondering some questions. So seeing the work in different contexts. So very lucky to be part of Fresh and giving the opportunity to develop these work, this body of work further. So yeah, I'd kind of like to say the thank you for what BCB has done for me, and it's been very interesting 3 years since graduating, and surprisingly, I like the development of work, where it's heading. But since I graduated and then I had a body of work, what do I do with this body of work? Can it evolve aesthetically? Can it be evolved through the ideas of where it's placed within the world? So playing around with different venues, how bring attention to different architectural aspects of buildings. So just having some pieces slightly hidden away, or some pieces which highlight certain aspects of the building. So, or even perhaps like just having work which is contrasted with other people's work. So just playing around with those ideas. But then you get to a point, you mess around, and where can the work go? And sometimes the goods, you play around and you mess around a little bit, and small accidents happen, or big accidents. And I often like to play around with these materials and what they can do. And the temperature can come into a big role, and breaking a bit the traditions of what clay can do, and see where that goes. So a little incident that happened in the kiln and kind of led to some work like this, which displayed can have a viewpoint which can be, I can be in control of how it can be displayed in a exhibition. So it creates a viewpoint, which in a way I'm in control on how people view the work, but also sculpture in a way and 3D objects have the power to make people move around the object, around the space, and lead it into a certain space or towards a particular piece. So I kind of like where this work can do. It can be a nice way when it happens, but at the same time it can be, I'm quite happy with if that happens, but I'm happy for people not to pick that up. So, well, in that sense, I don't have much of an option then. But yeah, so playing around with temperature, how much in control I can be of a piece, but then again, clay will do whatever it wants, but then it's that relationship between me and the work, and it gives me something and then I give something to it. And yeah, so it can now be displayed on a wall, could be displayed on a shelf, and so there's endless possibilities to the work since when it's made. So just working with different venues as well and how we can bring attention to some features. This particular project was in Portugal, so I was looking at how they can be, how by the use of the vessel to display flower arrangements can be a way of saving the patrimony of some elements of this particular space. So in this church, they used to use these green sponges which they soak in water and they have live flowers, but the water would leak into the wooden altars and actually rot the altar. So just finding ways of like actually introducing vases and containing the water, but yeah, also taking the opportunity to use certain elements of my work to have a dialogue with the elements of the space. So having that little simple coil which mimics a bit the snake around the sculpture. So kind of like that sense of like humor, but that dialogue is quite interesting to me in relation to the vases and the more controlled aspect of an exhibition. So this was really at the beginning of COVID, and so COVID hits. So I had a lot of time to think about my practice and how to develop it a bit into these forms of this restraint, but also the idea of the coil being an expansion of the form. So as it's reaching out, like some of the coils seem like it's reaching out or trying to do something or become something. So I'm kind of like going to talk about a little bit of where I come from, and so you get an idea, because I initially thought I'm producing this work, but I wasn't really realizing how much of a self-reflection. I just had to really self-reflect on how related the work is to me. So I was actually, so this is a bit of a story time. I'll try to make it real quick. But I was actually born in the UK, and when I was about 6, so I was actually in school here, my parents decided to move to Portugal. So I was like 6, went to Portugal, started my school there, and I was there for about 8 years. And life for an immigrant, things are a bit difficult, and they're not as brilliant as we think. And my parents are like, okay, this is not working so fine. Initially, they were like, okay, we're Portuguese, we need to like see if we can make a future out of this and like have you grow in this environment and this culture. And all of a sudden, my parents are like, okay, this is not working out. Let's go back to the UK. And I was about 13. This is literally the year before GCSEs and A levels. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, this is my future. I need to like quickly pick up what I want to do with my future. I actually wanted to be a pilot, but then again, I was starting to get the hang of like my Portuguese and had friends, and you're growing up in a culture, and all of a sudden you're in a different environment, and that in your head. Now thinking about it, it's quite, I wouldn't say traumatic, but it does have an effect on you. And like my Portuguese is pretty shocking, and my English is pretty shocking. So, and here my friends, they actually Portuguese, and they can tell you how bad my Portuguese is. But so that sense of like belonging to places, but not belonging to the same place. So I feel like that's, and I'm realizing how that's coming back into the work. The work is, I don't know, there's that sense of like not belonging somewhere, but at the same time belonging everywhere. And I start to really reflect that, and and how do I move this forward? So I was quite excited to make that realization, and so that's perhaps why I'm so interested in juxtapositions, playing with that idea of function and how that the correlation between me and my work and ideas of craft not fitting within the fine art spectrum, and ideas of placements and trying to fit in a box and becoming something, but also what is happening in the world constantly with the current pandemic, how people are not sure what is happening around them, and what we see around the news and what's happening around the world, where people are constantly displaced through war and conflict. So I hope people somehow can relate to the work in a sense, because in a way we all, in different ways, feel this idea of like not fitting in a particular category. And yeah, so yeah, that I kind of mentioned about the cups. Some people are like, oh, but the cups are thrown and they don't really have that aesthetic of your main work. But I don't know. I feel like it's a little, might take me like 5-10 minutes to throw a cup, but that 10 minutes of me throwing a cup, it's me in those 10 minutes. It's like literally me being captured in a cup. Although it's not me literally fingerprinting my fingers into clay, it's, I don't know, there's that moment, and that's, so I kind of like that idea. So I just like to point that out. And yeah, so I managed to go to Gulago in Denmark. So that was very exciting. It was only a month, which doesn't seem like a long time. Seems like quite a long time, actually, but in reality, it's not actually that long. And so I didn't really know. I thought, okay, you kind of need to work on some work. Do I just continue with what I'm doing? What can I do? So I thought they had some amazing glaze facilities, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to play around with flux, because I initially started with flux, that idea of becoming something, and I just thought, just play around with materials, see where things go, and yeah, so just try different percentages, see how that can be used in the work. So we've got those two pieces at the top were some work. They are two pieces that are actually downstairs, and there's so much control I have over the pieces by using flux. Not even just flux, I can just be using porcelain on its own end, or terracotta as well. And all of a sudden, it does what it wants. So I like that sense of being in control to a certain point, but then the environment we are surrounded on ourselves has an effect on the work. So yeah, I've just messed around with some flux and produced some work which we can see just over here. So some of the work, like just playing around it again with the handles and that melting points. So it's slightly humorous. I don't know. I like to think it's slightly humorous. It doesn't scream like color, or like it doesn't depict something that you might find humorous. But if you start dissecting it a little bit, yeah, I like that idea of just being against everything, but trying to be somewhere. So yeah, I can just show you through like some work which is downstairs at the moment. And if you guys want, I can go downstairs in a bit and can talk about some particular pieces. But yeah, so here's a quick overview of some of the work I've got. So I've got the tea sets, which again, there's some elements which can be taken out, but at the same time should be stuck there, and then some little happy accidents. Well, opening the kiln and seeing that you're not too excited, you feel like, well, that's a big bill you need to pay. But there's a certain beauty about it, and like that extension of the coil and where it's leading, and look at it, it's a bit ugly, but then there's certain details which you like, it just works. And yeah, just using terracotta. So I'm mostly using porcelain at the moment, but also terracotta, talking about that idea of where it's coming from, a bit more of an ordinary clay, and being more in control where the flux is. So playing with the idea of like, I'm not so much in control, but at the same time I'm in control where the flux is, and yeah, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm kind of bored of like just using, I don't know if I'm bored, but how do I introduce color? This work is basically what I am, and then even just ourselves wearing clothes, just having a bit of colorful clothing, you're like, oh, is that a bit much? Is that exposing yourself a bit much? And then I'm trying to do that on the work, and I'm like, oh, how do I subtly include some color, or is it a bit too much? But just looking at like some references and like looking at this imperial yellow and what it meant throughout history, where it was just only made available to a certain class, so higher kings and stuff, and yes, so slowly including that. So I thought that's where I'm at the moment. So it was actually a piece I did a couple of years ago, the actual shape, but the flux wasn't melting. So then I was like, how can I save this? So introducing color and playing with that, and a certain control over it, but at the same time, I don't know, there's something about it which I really like. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So yeah.